The royal corridors are shaking. In a twist no one foresaw, Prince Edward has been handed Prince Philip's most treasured private estate, completely bypassing Prince Andrew, who believed it was his birthright. But what triggered this shift in royal favour? And why now, amidst the most fragile chapter in royal history? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The news came not with fanfare or ceremony, but as a quiet ripple across the royal landscape. Prince Edward, the youngest of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip's children, had been named the inheritor of Philip's most privately held and personally cherished estate in Scotland. No press conference, no family statement, just a confirmed entry in a discreet probate ruling that sent shockwaves through the royal inner circle. This estate wasn't part of the Crown's official holdings. It was Philip's sanctuary, his retreat from the ceremonial demands of monarchy, and, most importantly, it was widely expected to pass to his second son, Prince Andrew. For decades, Andrew had believed it was a foregone conclusion, yet without warning, that expectation crumbled. Within hours, whispers filled the palace halls. How could this happen? Why Edward, the quiet, dutiful sibling who had rarely sought the limelight? Many insiders clung to the old tradition's birth order, perceived favour, past precedent. By those standards, Andrew should have inherited the estate without contest, yet the decision was final. Philip's will had been revised in his final months, a change few were aware of, and even fewer dared to question. It was a decision made in solitude, away from public eyes, but now its consequences were undeniable. Edward, ever composed, issued no statement. A signal, perhaps, that the inheritance wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility passed in confidence. But Andrew was not silent. His inner circle was reportedly livid. They spoke of betrayal, of backroom dealings, of a father's judgment clouded by late-life influence. Questions quickly multiplied. Who had Philip spoken to in his final weeks? Had Charles known? Had the Queen? Or had Edward alone earned this final mark of trust? The royal family, already strained under the weight of modern scrutiny, found itself once again under a magnifying glass. This time, it wasn't just scandal, it was legacy. The quiet transfer of Philip's estate had ignited old rivalries, reopened buried wounds, and left one brother at the centre of a storm he never asked for. But Edward's silence wasn't just about dignity. According to those closest to the estate proceedings, it was about protection, of a secret, a promise, and perhaps something far more damning about the brother now challenging it all. But beneath this royal inheritance lies a darker story, one of betrayal, secret documents, and a brother's legal war that could rip the House of Windsor apart. In a stunning escalation, Prince Andrew launches a legal challenge against his brother Edward, claiming undue influence and manipulation of Philip's final wishes. But the palace never expected how far Andrew would go, or what he was willing to expose to get the estate back. What began as private whispers of discontent exploded into a full-blown legal campaign that caught the entire royal household off guard. Just weeks after the estate was formally transferred to Edward, Andrew's legal team filed a confidential petition contesting the validity of their father's revised will. The claim? That Edward, through a series of undisclosed conversations and silent interventions, had swayed Prince Philip in his final days. The document spoke of emotional coercion, backdoor arrangements, and influence executed in isolation terms that struck at the very heart of royal dignity. For the first time in decades, the monarchy found itself forced to respond not just to public scandal, but to a brother versus brother war brewing behind closed courtroom doors. Palace lawyers moved swiftly, trying to stem the leaks before they reached the press. But it was too late. A dam had broken. Select details from the case, carefully curated yet undeniably damaging, began to surface. Court documents cited unnamed royal aides, notes from Philip's private staff, and even the potential summoning of long-time household members who had been with the Duke until the end. Andrew's strategy was clear. If the estate couldn't be reclaimed through birthright, then it would be through litigation. And if that meant exposing the cracks in the family's public image, So be it. The monarchy, already navigating turbulent waters, was about to be pulled into a storm it could no longer ignore. Behind the scenes, Charles and Camilla scrambled to contain the fallout. The king, still newly crowned and desperate to avoid yet another Windsor implosion, attempted back-channel talks with both brothers. Camilla, known for her quiet but tactical diplomacy, reached out to Edward's wife, Sophie, hoping to cool the temperature before it reached a boiling point. Those close to him say he believed this was more than inheritance. It was about restoration, about respect, about reclaiming a piece of what he felt had been systematically taken from him since his descent from royal favour. And in those private courtrooms, shielded from press, protected by royal privilege, the legal feud turned bitter. Sharp words were exchanged. Allegiances were tested, and more than one family secret nearly surfaced in testimony. Still, Edward remained composed. He made no public statement, refused to dignify the claims with reaction, and instead let the legal process unfold. But within royal circles, the pressure was mounting. Allies were picking sides. Old wounds were reopening, and palace insiders began to fear that Andrew's endgame was no longer about the estate at all. It was about something deeper, something far more dangerous. As Andrew's case gained traction, palace insiders feared something far more dangerous. Tucked away in a sealed box beneath Philip's writing desk were 3 handwritten letters, 2 to his sons and 1 to the crown. Their contents remained hidden until Edward revealed them in court. What they said turned the case on its head and shattered Andrew's claim. For weeks, Andrew's legal assault had grown louder, more aggressive, and dangerously unpredictable. His accusations of coercion, manipulation, and undue influence had placed Edward on the defensive, threatening not only his inheritance, but his integrity. The palace had grown uneasy. The public was beginning to waver. Even the king's own attempts at intervention had failed to extinguish the fire. Then, without warning, Edward's legal team filed a quiet motion to introduce new evidence. It wasn't a document drawn up by lawyers or advisors. It wasn't an official file stamped by the crown. It was something far more personal, far more final. 3 letters, handwritten by Prince Philip himself, sealed and dated for release only after his death. Each letter bore a different weight. The one addressed to Edward was direct and filled with conviction. Philip spoke not just as a father, but as a man passing on a mantle of trust. In it, he described Edward as the true torchbearer of his legacy, a son whose character, discretion, and consistency earned him more than titles or duties, but the right to preserve the values Philip held sacred. It wasn't flowery or sentimental, it was definitive. A decision written in Philip's unmistakable hand, untouched by palace lawyers or court pressure, and it crushed any notion that Edward's inheritance had been manipulated. Then came the second letter addressed to Andrew. This one was different, shorter, colder, and far more cryptic. Philip wrote of redemption and consequences, hinting at past choices and a future that would not be shaped by entitlement, but by accountability. There were no declarations of disappointment, no direct accusations, just a clear boundary drawn by a father who understood the damage that unchecked ambition could cause. Andrew's team attempted to dismiss the letters as emotionally charged and irrelevant, but the court disagreed. Intent was everything, and in these letters, intent was etched in ink that could not be erased. The third letter, meant for the crown and submitted under seal, reportedly confirmed that Philip's personal estate decisions had been made independently, without consultation from senior members of the royal family. This detail silenced the final accusation that Charles or anyone else had interfered to shape the outcome in Edward's favour. Royal advisors, initially reluctant to release the letters due to their sensitive tone, were forced to comply after pressure mounted from inside the courtroom. And once disclosed, the effect was immediate. Public opinion, long fractured, began to coalesce around Edward. For the first time in weeks, the narrative shifted. He was no longer the quiet brother in the shadows, he was the chosen one. But Edward's legal victory wasn't just built on his father's words. It was also tied to a forgotten promise that Philip had made decades earlier. Years before his passing, Prince Philip had secluded himself at Wood Farm, far from Buckingham's prying eyes. It was there, insiders reveal, that a secret pact was made with Prince Edward, one that bound them in a promise of trust, silence, and legacy. While the world watched the royal family through polished windows and filtered statements, something deeper was unfolding far from public view. After stepping back from the rigid demands of palace life, Philip retreated to the peace of Wood Farm, a modest, isolated corner of the royal estate where ceremony faded and reflection began. This wasn't exile, it was intent. A deliberate step away from the pageantry so he could shape the future on his own terms. And in that quiet space, it wasn't Charles or Andrew who stood at his side, it was Edward. Repeated visits, often unannounced and always without aides, sparked rumours even among the most senior palace staff. No press followed, no public record noted it, but the bond between father and youngest son was growing into something no one had anticipated. Those close to Wood Farm say Philip opened up in ways he never had before. He shared fragments of personal writings, his frustrations with the institution, and his deep concerns about the legacy he'd leave behind. And it was during these private conversations that Edward made a solemn promise, not one bound by law or witnessed by the crown, but one anchored in loyalty. He vowed to protect what his father cherished most. The traditions Philip felt were fading, the properties he saw as symbols of resilience, and the vision he held for a monarchy that could withstand the storms of scandal and public doubt. The promise, though never recorded, became the axis upon which Philip's final decisions turned. Palace insiders would later testify to Edward's quiet but consistent involvement with Philip's personal affairs, handling estate matters, managing correspondence, even overseeing restorations to parts of the property the crown had long neglected. It wasn't ambition, it was stewardship, a role not claimed, but entrusted. And while the rest of the family carried on with their public roles, Edward's influence at Wood Farm deepened. There was no announcement, no acknowledgement. But the pact, unseen, unspoken, was real. And when Philip passed and the inheritance shocked the family, many began to look back at those years at Wood Farm with new eyes. Suddenly, the silence made sense. The visits, the private talks, the absence of cameras. What the public missed, the palace had ignored. Edward hadn't simply inherited the estate. He had earned it through quiet loyalty, through service not to the crown, but to a man whose legacy he swore to protect. And that loyalty, it seemed, had not gone unnoticed by Philip. But while Edward honoured that promise with quiet dignity, Andrew grew restless, suspicious. And soon, he began digging into the only thing he believed could unravel it all. As Edward rose in quiet influence, Andrew grew increasingly bitter and began digging into the one thing that could overturn everything, the royal financial records. When bloodline wasn't enough to win the estate, Andrew turned to scandal. Whispered accounts, suspicious transfers, and coded ledgers. He believed he could expose something in Edward's dealings that would force the palace to reconsider. What he found was far worse than anyone expected. Determined to claw back the estate that had slipped through his fingers, Prince Andrew launched a quiet but aggressive financial probe, one designed not just to question Edward's integrity, but to uncover any thread that could unravel his brother's newfound position. Working with a discreet network of former financial consultants and estate insiders, Andrew's team began combing through years of private transactions linked to Prince Philip's personal holdings. What they discovered shocked even the most seasoned advisors. Over the span of nearly a decade, several properties previously associated with Philip had been transferred quietly without press notice, public registry changes, or even formal announcements within the royal household. Each move was done through trusted intermediaries. Legal, yes, but unusually silent. At the center of it all was a document no one outside a select few had ever seen. An internal account ledger buried deep within the Windsor archives, known cryptically as Column 14. This wasn't standard crown accounting. It was Philip's own disbursement log, reportedly maintained in parallel with the royal financial system. It tracked private gifts, property management decisions, and unlisted estate provisions. Most of the entries were mundane, but several lines stood out: large transfers, unexplained holdings, and subtle shifts in ownership, all appearing to benefit Edward over the years. For Andrew, it was the smoking gun. Proof, he believed, that a coordinated effort had been made to sideline him long before Philip's death. Andrew's legal counsel began compiling a case around these findings, arguing that the estate decisions weren't the result of a last-minute will revision, but part of a long-standing campaign to diminish his standing within the family. He was convinced the financial trail showed intent, a deliberate and quiet exclusion masked as legacy planning. The Palace Finance Office responded swiftly and sternly. They denied all allegations of impropriety, insisting that every transfer was lawful, accounted for, and executed under Philip's personal direction. But the tension had already reached a boiling point. The media, ever hungry for cracks in the royal veneer, began circling. Headlines speculated about secret accounts, hidden property empires, and potential misuse of royal funds. Edward, true to form, remained silent. No press conferences, no interviews, no statements. His refusal to comment only fueled the fire. The public, now watching closely, began asking uncomfortable questions. Had the royal family manipulated its own inheritance process? Had the monarchy once again shielded itself behind walls of silence and privilege? Andrew thought he had finally found the pressure point that would force the palace to negotiate. That Edward's silence would eventually fracture under the weight of financial scrutiny. But the royal family had one more move, one they'd kept hidden, buried in the past, waiting for the moment Andrew stepped too far. But just when Andrew thought he had leverage, the family turned the tables by releasing a long-suppressed conversation between Philip and the Queen. In a rare and emotionally charged moment, Queen Elizabeth had once confided in her consort about the future of the family. That moment, captured in a private journal, revealed the monarch's true feelings about her sons and who she believed could carry Philip's legacy with honor. As the legal storm surrounding Philip's estate continued to escalate, the palace had one last weapon, long buried and fiercely protected. In the royal archives, under lock and key, lay a handwritten journal, Queen Elizabeth's personal reflections during the final years of her reign. Few even knew it existed. Fewer still had read its contents. But what it held was more powerful than any legal motion or financial record. A single entry, dated just months before Philip's passing, chronicled a conversation between the Queen and her husband, a moment of unfiltered candor where the crown met the mother, the sovereign met the wife, and the future of the monarchy was quietly debated in whispers. In that entry, Elizabeth expressed her growing concern not about protocol or perception, but about Andrew, his spiraling reputation, the scandals that refused to fade, the public's shifting trust, and most damning of all, her fear that entrusting him with anything of legacy would taint the values Philip had spent a lifetime upholding. She urged Philip to reconsider old assumptions, to look not at titles or order of birth, but at character, at consistency, at quiet strength. Her words carried weight, not as a command, but as counsel. She didn't name Edward as the successor outright, but she did make it clear. If Philip wanted his legacy to endure untarnished, there was only one son who could carry it forward without scandal shadowing every step. Royal archivists, pressed by the growing legal threat, authenticated the journal entry under oath, and though it was never meant to enter a courtroom, it was Camilla and Princess Anne who insisted it be introduced, not as evidence of law, but as a reflection of truth. A voice from within the crown itself, silencing speculation with conviction. When the words of the Queen were read aloud, even the press softened. Public sympathy shifted once more. Headlines that had once questioned Edward's silence now praised his restraint. Opinion pieces framed him not as a usurper, but as a steady heir to Philip's quieter principles. Andrew's legal team had no response. There was no counterclaim to a mother's private truth. The journal entry didn't just dismantle his legal argument, it dismantled the very foundation of his belief that legacy could be reclaimed through entitlement. And for Edward, It was a moment of painful vindication, not triumphant, not loud, but final. And yet, even as the world saw Edward as the victor, a final act behind palace gates would change the story one last time. As the scandal threatened to split the monarchy in two, King Charles had no choice but to intervene. In a late-night meeting at Clarence House, he summoned his brothers and issued a royal ultimatum that would silence one and elevate the other forever. The monarchy had endured scandal before, but never like this. The headlines were relentless. The legal battles, though private, had begun to poison public trust, and behind palace walls, the fractures were becoming impossible to conceal. King Charles, who had long avoided wading directly into the feud between Edward and Andrew, now found himself cornered. Advisors warned of reputational collapse. Commonwealth allies grew restless. Even within Parliament, whispers about the monarchy's stability began to circulate. There was no more time for silence. Something had to be done. And so, under the cover of night and without staff present, Charles summoned both brothers to Clarence House. It was not a request, it was a command. What followed was not a conversation, it was an ultimatum. Charles spoke plainly. The damage from the inheritance dispute had spilled beyond the palace gates, threatening the very institution they were sworn to protect. The public saw division. The press smelled blood. And if it continued, Andrew risked more than embarrassment. He risked removal. Charles made it clear. If Andrew pursued the case any further, the crown would be forced to strip him of what few ceremonial roles he still retained. There would be no middle ground, no compromise born of tradition or sentiment. Either the war ended now, or Andrew would find himself exiled in all but name. But the king, ever pragmatic, extended a final offer. A financial settlement, substantial but quiet, designed to preserve Andrew's dignity in the eyes of his daughters. Alongside it, a symbolic title, a courtesy nod to lineage, though stripped of real influence. It was a calculated gesture, enough to save face, but not enough to fuel further ambition. In exchange, Edward would retain the estate formally and without contest. More than that, Charles would bestow upon him a new ceremonial honour, one that tied Edward to their father's legacy in both title and public perception. A signal to the world that the monarchy had made its choice. Neither brother spoke much that evening. There were no handshakes, no reconciliation, just a tense silence as they left through separate exits. But the message was clear. The crown had drawn its line. And for the first time since Philip's passing, the storm seemed to calm. In the days that followed, statements were issued, carefully worded, mutually agreed upon. The feud, officially, was over. Edward stood, vindicated. Andrew, silenced, but not erased. And Charles, firm, decisive and unyielding, had reminded the world that the monarchy would not fracture under pressure. But while the public believed the feud had ended, behind the palace walls, another twist was already brewing, one that involved Andrew's daughters. Caught in the fallout of their father's downfall, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie find themselves caught between loyalty and legacy. As their uncle Edward ascends, they must choose, align with the new family order or stand by the man who may have lost everything. In the royal family, silence is often more revealing than speech, and throughout the storm that engulfed the House of Windsor, Beatrice and Eugenie's silence spoke volumes. As Andrew fought and ultimately fell in his campaign to reclaim what he believed was his daughters were left stranded in the quiet, watching from the shadows. Neither woman issued a public statement during the legal proceedings. Neither was seen at court. Yet behind the scenes, emotions ran high. Beatrice, the more politically poised of the two, is said to have pushed for a peaceful settlement, imploring her father to step back before lasting damage was done. Eugenie, fiercely loyal to Andrew, was less forgiving. Sources close to the palace whispered of late-night phone calls, arguments behind closed doors, and tearful confrontations that left deep scars on already fragile relationships. When Edward was officially confirmed as the inheritor of Philip's estate, the family moved quickly to stage a show of unity. A private celebration was planned at the estate, attended by senior royals and key supporters. Invitations were extended to all, including Beatrice and Eugenie. But only one RSVP was returned. Beatrice, in a move that surprised many, quietly accepted and appeared at the event, though not with fanfare or a full heart. Eugenie declined, citing a scheduling conflict, though insiders knew the truth. She couldn't bear to watch Edward receive the legacy she had believed would belong to her father. That absence didn't go unnoticed. It echoed louder than any words she could have spoken, yet the sisters were not entirely unified in their resistance. Beatrice, recognizing the shifting winds within the monarchy, began taking small, calculated steps toward reconciliation. She reached out to Edward's foundation, expressing interest in joining one of its charitable initiatives. Though unofficial, it was seen as an olive branch, a subtle signal that not all ties had been severed. Eugenie, on the other hand, remained distant, not hostile, but wounded. She saw her father's fall as not just a loss of property, but a loss of position, of legacy. And in Edward, she saw the embodiment of a new royal order that had no place for the old loyalties. The next major royal gathering would lay bare the fracture. It was meant to be a public moment of solidarity, a photo op for the ages. But when the cameras clicked, the tension was unmistakable. Beatrice stood near Edward, smiling but subdued. Eugenie kept her distance, exchanging no words, no glances. It was an awkward silence only the family could decode. A silence forged not from politics, but from heartbreak. But as the dust settles, and Edward finally steps forward to claim his father's legacy, a powerful moment of reckoning awaits. Before the gates of the very estate that caused a royal war, Prince Edward delivers a rare and emotional address. But as he speaks of duty, legacy, and family, one question lingers in the air: was it truly a victory, or a quiet exile behind castle walls? The sun had barely risen on the day the world watched Edward stand alone, facing the burden of a legacy once wrapped in secrecy and silence. With cameras trained on him, and royal eyes fixed from across the palace lawns, Edward began to speak not as a victor, not as a prince demanding recognition, but as a son honoring the man whose name now echoed through every stone of the estate. In a voice laced with reflection, he spoke of values instilled, lessons whispered in private moments, and a vision for the monarchy that was not built on spectacle, but on perseverance. He never mentioned Andrew. Not once. But his carefully chosen words told the story that the family had tried to contain difficult choices, painful journeys, and the cost of preserving what matters most. The response was immediate and polarized. To some, it was the speech of a quiet hero, the man who had weathered the storm without scandal or vengeance, and emerged with dignity intact. To others, it felt incomplete, too measured, too careful, as if the truth still lay behind those locked estate gates, untouched and unrevealed. The absence of Andrew was glaring. His daughters were nowhere in sight. The divide was no longer whispered, it was seen. It was recorded, and it was undeniable. But by Edward's side stood two silent pillars of strength, Camilla and Princess Anne. Their presence wasn't merely symbolic, it was deliberate, an endorsement of the path chosen and a clear message to those who had resisted it. Then came the final moment. The estate, long known by its quiet ancestral name, was formally renamed in Philip's honor. With this, Edward tied himself irrevocably to his father's legacy, not only as its inheritor, but now as its steward. The weight of that legacy, once the cause of legal battles and family estrangement, now rested solely on his shoulders. And with his final words, he offered neither triumph nor apology, but a challenge to the future: may we be worthy of the names we inherit. As he stepped away, speculation erupted. Was this the beginning of a larger role for Edward within the monarchy, or the quiet end to a chapter that nearly tore it apart? The estate was his. The conflict was over. But beneath the surface, fractures still remained, lines drawn in silence, scars that no speech could truly heal. Though the estate may be settled, the fractures it revealed remain, reminding us that even in royalty, the price of legacy is never paid in gold alone. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.